The crystal glass shook slightly in my hand, catching the chandelier's glow as my mother's voice, sharp and cutting, shattered the refined hum of the St. Regis ballroom. "Look at Alara, everyone," Catherine Vance declared, her manicured finger leveled at me like a weapon. 38 years old and still sitting alone. What a disappointment I must be as a mother. A ripple of laughter and whispers followed, spreading like wildfire among San Francisco's elite. Faces turned, eyes gleaming with amusement, hungry for drama. At the head table, Brianna glowed like royalty in her Oscar de la Renta gown, pride radiating off her as she leaned against Chad, whose smirk told me he was savoring the spectacle. It was the same script I'd lived my entire life. Catherine the ringmaster, Brianna the star, and me the punchline. But tonight, something in me had shifted. I rose slowly, feeling the silk of my mock dress fall into place. The weight of humiliation pressed against my chest, but beneath it was something stronger. Resolve. My voice, steady and deliberate, carried across the ballroom. "You keep asking about my husband, Mother," I said. "Funny thing is, you've already met him." The room went still. Catherine's sharp laugh cut through the silence. "Oh, please, Alara. Your little fantasies won't." The rest of her words were drowned out by the thunderous roar of helicopter blades. Gasps broke through the crowd as the massive windows rattled and chandeliers swayed. The elegant hum of the evening dissolved into chaos. Guests pressed against the glass, whispering furiously as a sleek Augusta Westland descended onto the hotel's private pad. My phone buzzed in my palm. "On my way up, Mrs. Thorne." I didn't need to look to know who it was. The ballroom doors opened with a force that silenced every last whisper. Damien Thorne stepped inside, his tall frame cutting a sharp figure in a tailored suit. His presence commanded the room instantly, but it wasn't just him. In his arms, nestled securely, was our daughter Lily. Her white dress sparkled under the lights as her small eyes scanned the sea of faces. "Mama," Lily called, her little voice carrying louder than the microphone ever could. Every gaze snapped back to me. The woman they'd mocked as lonely, invisible, a failure, was no longer the narrative they controlled. Damien crossed the room, his stride confident, eyes locking on mine with a warmth I'd never known from my own family. He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close as though daring anyone to question it. The hotel manager hurried forward, his tone reverent. "Mr. Thorne, Mrs. Thorne, we're honored. Welcome to your hotel." The words landed like thunder. Catherine's face went pale, her lips parting as if to protest but finding nothing. Brianna's perfect smile cracked, confusion twisting into panic. Chad leaned forward, blinking hard, as though trying to place Damien's face with the name that carried billions behind it. I held my mother's gaze, refusing to flinch. For decades, she had made me small, but tonight, under the lights and whispers of her own carefully curated society, she was the one shrinking. I felt Lily's tiny hand clutch my shoulder, grounding me in the truth I had carried all along. The humiliation she had intended wasn't mine anymore. It was hers, and it had only just begun. My name is Alara Vance, and at 38, I had mastered the art of existing in the background. The kettle hissed softly on the stove while I sat at the kitchen table, my fingers wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee that I had forgotten to drink. The blinds allowed strips of sunlight to paint the small apartment in soft lines, yet even the warmth of the morning could not soften the cold echo of my mother's words. My phone lit up on the table with her latest decree. "Remember, Alara, today is Brianna's day. Don't draw attention to yourself. That vintage dress is a choice. Just be pleasant." I stared at the message, the familiar sting wrapping around me like a second skin. It was never enough for Catherine to remind me of my place privately. She had to twist the knife even in small moments, as if ensuring I never forgot that in her eyes, my role was to fade into the wallpaper while Brianna sparkled in the spotlight. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but I locked the screen instead. There was no point in answering. There never was. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each passing second reminding me that in a few hours I would be standing in the grand ballroom of the St. Regis, surrounded by polished strangers who would see me exactly as my family wanted them to see me. The forgotten daughter, single, unimpressive, quietly tolerated. I took a breath, steadying myself against the tide of dread. Rising from the table, I walked down the short hall to my bedroom. The air felt stiller here, almost sacred, and on the dresser sat a small wooden box. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, the tiny click sounding louder than it should have. Inside lay the pieces of a life no one in my family knew existed. The marriage certificate rested on top, edges worn from the countless times I had traced the ink with my fingertips. Damien Thorne. The name carried a weight my mother would never comprehend. 5 years earlier, I had signed that paper with hands that were shaking not from doubt, but from the overwhelming relief of finally choosing someone who saw me. Tucked beneath it were photographs, snapshots of a life I kept hidden like a secret garden. Damien's steady gaze, Lily's smile wide with the innocence of childhood, our moments frozen in time away from Catherine's reach. I lifted one of Lily's pictures, her curly hair catching the sunlight as she sat laughing in Damien's arms. My throat tightened. To the world my mother paraded, I was the failure. To them, I was the woman who never amounted to anything, the daughter they pitted behind forced smiles. Yet here, in the quiet of my apartment, I knew the truth. I was a wife, a mother, and more than that, I was the quiet hand behind the curtain. Damien had built an empire in tech security, a fortress that touched governments and corporations alike. Where others saw me as small, he trusted me with strategy, decisions that shaped the future of Thorne Solutions. I didn't need to stand in the spotlight because I was the architect of shadows, pulling strings that even Brianna's gilded world depended on. I returned the photo carefully, locking the box again, sealing away the truth until the moment it needed to breathe. Straightening my shoulders, I caught my reflection in the mirror across the room. The woman who stared back wasn't invisible, not really. She was simply waiting. Today, I would walk into that ballroom wearing the same dress my mother mocked, smile politely at the cruel whispers, and let them believe the lie a little longer. They thought I was powerless, a failure, a forgotten daughter sitting on the fringes of their empire. They had no idea the foundations beneath their perfect lives rested in my hands. I pulled into the circular driveway of the St. Regis, my modest car dwarfed by the sleek black town cars and polished luxury vehicles lined up at the entrance. Valets moved quickly, their eyes sliding over my sedan with practiced indifference before one of them approached, his forced politeness barely masking the disdain in his expression. I handed over the keys, my grip steady, refusing to let his smirk chip away at me. Inside, the marble lobby glowed with chandeliers and gold accents, the kind of opulence my family thrived in. The receptionist's eyes flickered briefly over my dress before her professional smile settled into something thinner. She typed a few words, then slid a key card across the counter. "The family requested this room for you, Miss Vance. It's on the ground floor, near the service elevator." Her tone was sweet enough, but the placement said everything. I took the card, thanked her calmly, and walked away, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The corridor to my room smelled faintly of bleach, the hum of machinery audible from behind the walls. Inside, the space was clean but bare, a bed pushed against the wall, a single armchair, a narrow window that looked directly onto a concrete alley. A functional box compared to the sprawling suites I knew my mother and sister had claimed upstairs. I set my bag down and let the silence settle, the kind of silence I had known too well all my life. They wanted me tucked away, out of sight, useful only when compared to Brianna's shining perfection. I took a deep breath, smoothed the wrinkles of my skirt, and reminded myself that I wasn't here for their approval. By the time I entered the cocktail hour, the ballroom was alive with chatter and clinking glasses. Men in tailored tuxedos and women draped in glittering gowns drifted through the room, laughing easily. I felt the weight of eyes on me the moment I walked in, the way they glanced once, then twice, as if trying to decide where I belonged. I spotted my mother across the room, a glass of champagne in her hand, her lips painted in the same deep red she had worn since I was a child. Brianna stood beside her, radiant, draped in layers of silk that shimmered with every movement. Their laughter rose above the hum of conversation, and as I drew closer, I caught the tail end of Brianna's voice, pitched just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Still single and trying to make a statement with vintage?" she said, her eyes flicking toward my dress, the corners of her mouth curved into a smile that wasn't kind. A few heads turned in my direction, and I felt the sting of the deliberate cruelty. Catherine leaned closer to her, whispering something that made them both laugh, their amusement at my expense more intoxicating to them than the champagne they sipped. I didn't react. I simply held my glass, nodded politely to those around me, and let the comment hang in the air like smoke. My silence, I knew, frustrated them more than anger ever could. When it came time to take our seats, the arrangement made the family's intentions painfully clear. I was led to table 14, tucked at the far end of the room, nearly hidden behind a massive floral centerpiece that blocked my view of the head table. From where I sat, I could see little more than the backs of people's heads and the shimmer of candlelight reflecting off crystal. My mother and sister sat in the front, their laughter and chatter carrying easily across the room, while I remained in the shadows. I sipped my wine slowly, the bitterness coating my tongue, and let the reality of their message sink in. I was not family in their eyes, not really. I was a placeholder, an afterthought, a convenient reminder of what Brianna was not. But as I sat alone, half hidden behind the flowers, I felt the familiar sting give way to something steadier, colder. They believed they had relegated me to obscurity once again, but they had no idea what I carried with me, or how soon the balance would shift. For now, I let them believe their little game. I had waited years. A few more hours meant nothing. Plates were cleared away, silverware gathered by servers who moved with quiet efficiency. The hum of conversation softened when Catherine rose from her chair. The microphone passed into her hand with the reverence of habit. She tapped it lightly, her smile fixed, the room falling silent as all eyes turned toward her. She began smoothly, her words dripping with practiced warmth. "Tonight, we celebrate Brianna, a daughter who has brought pride and joy to this family in every way. Her grace, her beauty, her ambition. Qualities that make her a shining example of what a woman should be." Applause filled the hall, glasses lifted, and Brianna glowed at the adoration. But the warmth cooled quickly, her tone sharpening as she continued. "Of course, not everyone understands the importance of choosing wisely. Some women," she paused deliberately, her gaze sliding across the tables until it landed squarely on me, "seem to think life can be lived without direction. They fail to realize that a woman's worth is reflected by the company she keeps. At a certain age, being alone isn't a preference, it's a punishment." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, refined but unmistakably cruel. My chair felt heavier beneath me, the edges of the table pressing into my palms, as if to hold me in place. Catherine's smile widened, pleased with herself, basking in the attention. She turned her glass slightly toward Brianna, the perfect foil to my supposed inadequacy. Across the hall, Chad leaned back in his seat, nudging one of his groomsmen. His smirk was wide as he lifted his champagne flute. "To the spinsters," he announced, his voice cutting through the polite laughter like a blade. His friends joined in, raising their glasses in exaggerated unison, their grins mocking as they clinked crystal with cruel delight. The sound rang in my ears, sharper than the clatter of silver or the drone of conversation. Heat rushed to my cheeks, humiliation searing like a brand against my skin. For a moment, the urge to shrink into the shadows pulled at me, the old instinct to become smaller, quieter, to endure until the spotlight shifted elsewhere. But I stayed still, forcing my breathing to slow, the burn in my chest transforming into something steadier. The laughter around me blurred into background noise, a hollow chorus that no longer had the power to pierce as deeply as it once had. Beneath the surface, something solid formed, a weight not of shame, but of resolve. Catherine continued her speech, unaware that each word only stoked the quiet fire within me. She spoke of legacy, of appearances, of how Brianna embodied the family's pride, while her sidelong glances reminded the room who did not. Every syllable was a carefully sharpened blade meant to wound, to remind me of the cage they had built for me long ago. Yet as the applause swelled once more, I realized I no longer feared the bars of that cage. The humiliation that was meant to suffocate me had crystallized into clarity. My family thought they had stripped me down to nothing, but what they couldn't see was the steel they had forged in me with every slight, every whisper, every public mockery like this one. I lifted my own glass slowly, not in agreement, not in surrender, but as a promise to myself. Their stage was built on cruelty, but mine was waiting, and soon it would be theirs to crumble upon. The moment had arrived. It was time. The chandeliers above rattled as the thunder of the blades shook the ballroom. I watched forks drop, glasses quiver, and conversations die mid-sentence. People surged toward the windows, their polished shoes and silk gowns colliding in their rush to see. A sharp beam of light sliced across the room, catching on sequins and startled faces. Gasps erupted all around me. Whispers tangled into a frantic hum. What is happening? Who would do this? My mother's heels clicked with practiced authority as she stormed forward, gripping the microphone. Her laugh was forced, brittle, already cracking at the edges. Oh, really? Some hired trick. Honestly, how desperate. How tacky. Her words were for the crowd, but her eyes flicked to me, sharp and accusing. The machine settled outside with a final shudder, the noise fading into a tense silence. Every guest pressed to the glass, holding their breath. Then the door opened. Damien stepped out. His presence was commanding, every movement precise. Even from a distance, the air seemed to bend around him. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with the knowledge that this moment was mine. And in his arms, Lily. My daughter. Her little white dress caught the lights, her ribbon fluttering in the breeze. She held on to him, wide-eyed yet serene, untouched by the tension rippling through the hall. From across the room, I heard Brianna's voice cut through the silence. Her champagne flute rattled in her hand. Wait, isn't that the man who catered that gala last year? What is Alara doing? The crowd rippled with confusion, guests whispering furiously, all eyes darting between me and the figures outside. My mother's knuckles whitened around the microphone. She leaned toward me, her voice low and venomous. What are you trying to pull? I didn't answer. I only stood still, letting the weight of the moment gather around me. For once, it wasn't their stage anymore. It was mine. The doors swung wide, and the room stilled as Damien stepped inside, every stride deliberate. He didn't hesitate, didn't pause to acknowledge the sea of stunned faces. His gaze was locked on me. Lily's arms wrapped around his neck, and then her small voice rang out, clear as a bell. Mama! The single word cut through the tension like glass breaking. I felt the air shift, hundreds of eyes darting from Lily to me, confusion twisting into dawning realization. Damien reached me without slowing, his arms slipping around my shoulders as though claiming what had always been his to guard. The crowd erupted in a wave of whispers, but it was the sudden appearance of the hotel manager that silenced them again. He hurried forward, posture bent in deference. His voice carried easily across the marble floors. Mr. Thorne, Mrs. Thorne, we had no idea you were here this evening. Welcome to your hotel. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. Your hotel. Not a suite. Not a reservation. Ownership. A truth I had carried quietly for years now bared in front of the very people who had dismissed me as a nobody. I watched the blood drain from Catherine's face, her grip on the microphone trembling. For once, she had no words. Her carefully sculpted mask fractured before me. Damien's eyes flicked toward the head table, where Chad shifted uneasily in his chair. When Damien spoke, his voice was calm but cutting. Chad, he said, each syllable deliberate, your role at the firm has been reviewed. The board has reached a conclusion regarding the embezzlement investigation. Chad's smirk faltered, the color draining from his face. What? He stammered, gripping his glass as though it might anchor him. You're finished, Damien said simply. Security will escort you out. The statement landed with the force of a hammer. Gasps tore through the room. Chad's parents froze, his groomsmen shifted uncomfortably, and Brianna's painted smile cracked at last. The perfect image of the Prestons, wealth, stability, status, shattered in an instant. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to explain. Standing there, Damien's arm around me and Lily's hand clutching my necklace, the truth was undeniable. The woman they had mocked, hidden, pushed aside, was the one they could no longer ignore. I reached for the microphone, my fingers steady as I pulled it from the DJ's hand. The silence in the room was so complete that I could hear the faint hum of the chandeliers above. I lifted my chin and let my gaze sweep the crowd, no longer shrinking in the shadows they'd assigned me. "You wanted to know about my husband, Mother," I said, my words firm, carrying across the ballroom. 5 years. That's how long Damien and I have been married. I kept our life private not because I was ashamed, but because I knew the lengths you would go to poison it. A ripple went through the guests, their curiosity sharpened, but I didn't pause. My eyes found Brianna, her painted smile trembling. "And you," I said, my voice colder now. "Remember the mysterious investor who stepped in when your husband's so-called vision nearly bankrupted you both? The savior you toasted in Montecito, the one you never bothered to thank." I let the pause linger, the anticipation build. That was me. It was my signature on that wire. My decision that kept you from losing everything. Brianna's face fell, her mouth opening then closing like she couldn't find oxygen. Catherine shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't give her room to interrupt. "For years," I continued, "you laughed at the idea of me working freelance, dismissed me as some minor bookkeeper with nothing to show for her life. That little cover was exactly what I wanted you to believe. What none of you knew is that I've spent the last decade shaping strategies for Thorn Solutions." A sharp intake of breath moved through the audience. I let the words sink in before finishing, my voice clear, sharp as glass. $5 billion. That's the valuation of the company I've helped guide. While you belittled me, while you mocked me, I was building something you couldn't even imagine. I didn't need your approval. I never did. I lowered the microphone slightly, watching as the carefully constructed illusions around me cracked like porcelain. For the first time in my life, the power in the room was mine. The ballroom was still ringing with the weight of my last words when I drew Lily into my arms. Her small hand clutched at my dress, and I felt her heartbeat against mine, steady and real, grounding me in the storm. "There's more," I said, my voice quieter now but sharper for it. The crowd leaned in, hungry for the unraveling. My eyes fixed on Catherine. "When I was 22, I came to you frightened, desperate for guidance. I told you I was pregnant. Do you remember what you said?" Catherine's lips pressed thin, her hands clenching at her sides. She didn't answer. "You gave me a choice," I continued, my tone slicing through the silence. "End my child, or end my place in this family. I chose my child." My voice rose, fueled by the memory of that night. "I walked out with nothing but determination. And while you spun your stories about me traveling Europe to find myself, I was finding the strength to protect Lily before she was even born." A gasp spread across the hall. Some guests looked at Catherine, others at me, as if trying to reconcile the lies they'd been fed with the truth unraveling before them. I shifted my gaze to Brianna, who had been standing frozen beside Chad, her face pale beneath layers of makeup. "And you," I said, the words falling heavy. "You've spent your life measuring yourself against me, clawing at every chance to prove you were superior. But all that envy, it was built on a lie." Her brows furrowed, confusion flickering. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't look away. "You're not my full sister. You never were. You're the product of an affair. Our mother's affair. Her perfect daughter, her shining jewel, the one she flaunted to hide her own imperfection." The room broke into a cacophony of shocked voices, chairs scraping, glasses clinking nervously against tables. But I kept my eyes on Brianna, who turned slowly toward Catherine, searching for denial, for reassurance. Catherine's silence was deafening. Her face, usually so controlled, betrayed her. Eyes wide, mouth slightly agape, horror etched in every line. Brianna staggered back a step, her hand lifting as though to ward off the truth. No, that's not. But Catherine didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth was written across her face, and Brianna saw it. In that moment, the cracks in my family's carefully curated image split wide open. Their lies weren't whispered secrets anymore. They were public, undeniable, irreversible. And for the first time, I wasn't the one left standing in shame. All eyes were fixed on me, yet I felt no fear, only clarity. The weight I had carried for decades was no longer mine. My gaze swept the room, catching the flickers of unease spreading through the crowd as my words settled like stones at the bottom of a still pond. You cling to this family name as if it's a badge of honor, I said, my voice even deliberate. But honor doesn't come from stolen land or ruined lives. It doesn't come from fraud disguised as legacy. Everything you held above my head, everything you used to remind me of my supposed inadequacy, it was rotten at the core. I paused, the silence stretching so tight it threatened to snap. Catherine's lips moved soundlessly, as though she were searching for a rebuttal that wouldn't come. Brianna's mascara-streaked face turned toward me, desperate for denial that would never arrive. For years, I continued, you laughed at my so-called frugality, at my simple dresses, my modest apartment, the car that didn't match your standards. You thought I was pathetic. But every dollar I appeared not to spend was being put toward righting the wrongs our grandfather left behind. A murmur rippled through the guests. I saw heads tilt, people whispering names, remembering stories of families who had vanished from neighborhoods without explanation. I steadied my voice. I found their children, their grandchildren. I knocked on doors, I wrote checks, I offered apologies for sins that weren't mine to bear but were mine to confront. I gave back what was stolen. Piece by piece, I returned what your fortune was built on. I let the revelation hang there, sharp as glass. That is what true inheritance looks like. Not money stacked on the bones of the betrayed. Not mansions built on someone else's grief. Legacy is the lives you restore, the dignity you return. That is the name I carry, and it has nothing to do with you. The ballroom was utterly still, save for the sound of a single glass being set down on a table. A few guests, their faces heavy with shame, wouldn't even look at Catherine. Others stared at me with something I hadn't felt in years when surrounded by my family, respect. Catherine's chest rose and fell rapidly, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table in front of her. You wouldn't dare, she stammered. But I cut her off with nothing more than the calm steadiness in my voice. I already did. The mountain I had been climbing in silence all my life towered above them now, and they stood at the bottom, stripped of their illusions. They could never climb it. Not with their lies. Not with their cruelty. Not with the emptiness where their conscience should have been. I tightened my grip on the microphone, my heart steady, my daughter safe in Damien's arms. For the first time, I wasn't fighting to belong. I had already won. The wreckage of the evening lingered in the air, abandoned glasses, toppled centerpieces, hushed conversations filled with disbelief. The grandeur of the ballroom no longer carried its shine. It felt like a stage stripped bare after the curtain fell. My family's perfect illusion had collapsed, and there was no salvaging it. Chad's absence was a wound Brianna couldn't disguise. She sat crumpled, her gown wrinkled, her sobs echoing faintly as others avoided her gaze. Catherine, once the commanding matriarch, stood hollow-eyed, her spine no longer straight with pride, but bent with a burden she could never unload. The silence between them was louder than any of their barbed words had ever been. Damien touched my arm lightly, grounding me with that simple gesture. In his other arm, Lily rested her cheek against his shoulder, her small fingers curled around the fabric of his suit. Together, we turned from the spectacle behind us. As we moved through the vast space, the crowd parted. Whispers followed us, but for once they weren't cruel. They carried awe, shock, perhaps even admiration. I didn't pause to acknowledge them. My focus was forward, toward the lobby where the path was clear and unchallenged. We didn't slip out quietly, as I had been forced to do so many times before. We walked directly through the grand entrance, past the glittering chandeliers, beneath the gilded archways, our steps unhurried, deliberate. The click of my heels against the marble echoed with a rhythm that felt like closure. At the far end, the penthouse elevator awaited, its polished doors gleaming. It wasn't just an escape. It was a symbol, a passage to a life that was mine, untouched by their poison. Catherine's faint voice carried across the distance. That child, she has my mother's eyes. A feeble attempt to tether me to her world. I didn't turn back. Some ties were better left severed. The elevator doors slid open, inviting us into a quiet that felt sacred. I stepped inside with Damien and Lily, the weight of generations' cruelty falling away as the doors closed. I looked down at my daughter, her small hand slipping into mine. Her trust, her warmth, her very existence reminded me of why I had endured, why I had fought, why I had chosen differently than the ones who came before me. As the elevator carried us upward, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by what I lacked in their eyes. I was defined by the life I had built, the love I had protected, the truth I had spoken. The war was done. I had not only survived, I had prevailed. And as we ascended, I felt the steady calm of freedom. This was my beginning, untethered, unbroken, finally my own. Do you think I made the right choice by walking away from them? Or should I have given them another chance? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoy stories like mine, please subscribe and stay connected.